What's going on, guys? My name is Robert, and you are watching Southpaw Autoworks. In this episode, you're going to get an inside look at what it takes to replace the output shaft on a 4L60E. Why might someone replace or swap out the output shaft on a 4L60E? Well, this could be done for a number of reasons. For example, there could be damage to the output shaft. Someone could be doing a conversion from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive, or a four-wheel drive to two-wheel drive conversion. And last but not least, someone could be upgrading the output shaft to something much stronger than the OEM application if that output shaft is going to be used in a high-performance application. If you're looking for 4L60E parts, I've got a bunch of resources located in the video description down below. In this episode, I'll be joined by my automatic transmission mentor and friend, Andy. We've all heard the phrase, he's a jack of all trades, or he's a jack of all trades but master of none. Well guys, I am bringing you the master of automatic and manual transmissions. Andy has been repairing, rebuilding, and diagnosing transmissions for over 40 years. He even has years of teaching experience at automotive tech schools. If you couldn't tell, I'm pretty excited to have Andy on the show today. Without further ado, let's dive in.
All right, what we're going to do for you here today is show you an output shaft change on this 4L60E trans. What we've got is a two-wheel drive version here with the extension housing. Customer wants the four-wheel drive output shaft put in it. All we're going to do is go in just far enough to make that changeover. We're not going to do any other overhaul work or anything, just take it apart, change the shaft, reseal it, put it back together for them. Pull off the bell housing first, take the rest of these bell housing bolts off. Remember, if you're not aware on this one, these bell housing bolts are specific, okay, on the 4L60Es as to the socket that it uses. It is a Torx, but it's not a standard Torx. It is special for these, and you will strip the head of that bolt if you use the wrong socket.
Andy is talking about the difference between an ordinary Torx bit and a Torx Plus bit. In this case, we're talking about the difference between a T50 and a TP50 Torx bit. Here they are side by side. If you look closely at the thickness or the width of the splines on the Torx Plus are much wider than the splines on the standard Torx. Like Andy said, if you use a standard Torx bit, there's a good chance that you'll strip out the head of these 4L60E bell housing bolts. Stripping out these bolts is really going to slow down your disassembly process, and it's going to also cost you the price of a new bolt, and you can't just run to the hardware store to buy this one. So don't make this mistake. Need a Torx Plus bit for your 4L60E project? We got you covered. Check out the resources section in the video description below.
Okay, we had the rest of those out. We'll take the bell housing off. Take the extension housing or tail housing off. That out of the way. That out of the way. There, we're going to move this output shaft here. Okay, we're going to flip it over. Get the pan off. One thing to remember on this transmission, like a lot of other ones, if you remove just your pump bolts and try and take the pump out, you're going to break stuff inside the transmission. And we'll show you what that is when we get the pan off. So we'll get the pan off first so that you can see that, see what we're talking about. Okay, all the bolts out. I always leave one in That way the pan doesn't fly off of there while I'm trying to knock it loose. So we got a washer on one of the bolts. Quick pan inspection, look at the magnet. Not too bad. This is supposed to be a rebuilt transmission from about 4,000 miles ago. So we got a little bit of junk on the magnet. Probably a little more than I'd like to see with only 3,000 or 4,000 miles on it, but it's not an oh my God. Always going to have metal on the magnet. All right, we'll take our filter off. This is one of the items I mentioned is this goes into the pump, okay? And so if you try and pull that pump off without removing the filter, you're gonna break the filter or damage the pump. When we pull the filter off, we wanna get in underneath it here, but don't pinch it against the wiring harness. There are harness and wires there and you can definitely do damage. So we wanna get in between there and hopefully not pinch a wire. A lot of more fluid to come out of here, so you gotta be careful there not to splash that all over. Get that out of the way. Okay, another item here we've got to remove is this solenoid here. You can see two 10mm bolts that hold that in place, but obviously to get to this one, we've got to remove this solenoid. So what we're going to do is take the connector off, get that out of our way, okay? And then what's tricky here is the clip that holds it in place is hidden down in this little slot right here. Kind of tough to get to sometimes, may not even be able to see that. But it's a wire clip that's down in there. Not a lot of room to grab it. Regular screwdriver is probably not going to fit down in there. Okay, you can barely even see it or touch it there. If you're lucky, maybe grab it. What I do is use a paper clip bent with a little hook on the end. Go down in there, grab that, pull it out. Okay, all right, take our special tool. Drop it down in there, rotate it, hook our clip. You're going to want to kind of cover that up too because it's going to want to come flying out of there. So we're going to pull on it, pull back on that clip, and that's what we had to remove. Once again, that will go flying across the room. Okay, remove that solenoid we just pulled the clip off of. And then what I do is I take the clip and put it back on the solenoid, lock it in place, set that aside. That way you don't lose that clip. Solenoid I mentioned here, what's called a lockup solenoid's got to come out. That sticks down into the pump once again. We don't want to damage that. Two little bolts out of there. Take a screwdriver, pocket screwdriver or something here, and you want to get a hold of that and just lightly pry out on it. There is an O-ring, just like on the other solenoid there. So it kind of holds it snug into the pump there, so you got to pry it out. What we're going to do there is just leave that laying aside, no big deal. Okay, we're going to do pump bolts. Okay. Now, we've got a couple different ways to go about getting this pump out of here. First thing you got to remember, if it has a O-ring on the shaft here, that's got to come off first because the stator, the pump itself will not slide over that O-ring. If you do, it's probably going to damage it. So we want to remove that carefully. Try not to damage that because we can reuse it. Now, slide that baby off there. Now, they make a tool to hook on here, pull the stator and the pump out using the input shaft as leverage. We're going to flat rate it and do it without the specialty tool, okay? So here's the tricky part. We can use a screwdriver, but you got to do it carefully. You cannot manhandle this thing. You will do damage, okay? What I like to do is come right in here underneath where the filter goes, first of all. Try and give it a little bit of a pry there, and then I'm going to work my way on both sides. Same thing. Not Magilla Gorilla here. We just want to try and pry in the pump and break it loose. All right. So we got it started there. Now I'm going to work over here to one side of the pump, a little at a time, and just work it back and forth. All right. I didn't get crazy with it. Now what I'm doing is I'm getting in here between the pump and the reverse input drum, because the drum likes to come out with the pump. You'll start pulling everything out. Doesn't work out so good. So try and hold the drum in with your screwdriver, wiggle this pump out, and get her out of there. Like I said, once again, you just want to be working it easy. Don't get carried away with it. Now, slowly. All right, it's being sticky. I think it's trying to pull the other drum out with it, so by now it should have probably released and just fallen out of there. There we go. Take that, set it aside. Here's the next point of interest here. Got a washer here, we can get that out of the way. Okay. We've got to release the band right here, 2/4 band from around that drum. That drum will not come past the band unless the band has a chance to expand itself. So either we're going to unhook it from the band anchor, which is right here underneath the valve body itself. If we're able to do that, release it from the anchor, we should be able to pull the drums out without a problem. If we can't get it off of there, we need a little more extra slack, if you will. We'll have to take the servo out the side to release it. Okay, I'm going to push the drum in just a little bit first. And where we're working at is right here. Directly above where the valve body would be, there's a band anchor right there. Okay? Push that down, it popped out of there with no problem. Usually not that easy, but what you've got to do is just push down on the band, release it from the anchor, and you'll see it pops out of place. The other side, which is anchored where the servo applies it, is not a big deal. We leave that alone at this point. So right now we should be good. Input shaft, input drum, reverse input, boom. Comes right out of there. So what we were doing, we were pushing in on the band. There's your anchor point on the band right there, okay? And that locks onto the band anchor right there. We've got to get way down inside here, release the snap ring. Now we've got to remove that snap ring. A pair of these little tiny snap ring pliers works real good. If not, you could always use one of the picks or ice picks sharpened really, really sharp to get down in there and get underneath it and pick it out of there. We'll try these. All right, let's give this a try. There we go. That's the guy we're trying to get out of there. All right, that'll allow us to remove some more components. Planetary front hub. Get those out of the way. Got a bearing that sits on there on the later model units and the shell. Big failure point on these transmissions. Okay. Next, what we've got is right down the center is what's called sun gear, which is blind to that shell. That comes out. That's what hooks on there. Okay. Next, we got another snap ring, but it's around the outside of the center support itself. We've got to unhook that from the case. I'm going to try and grab one end of it, pull it loose, and then grab it, unlock that from the case. Now we've got what's called the center support there to take out. Problem with the center support and removal of that is it tends to wear into the case or the case lugs, constantly getting beat against the side of the case. it wears a little groove in there. So when you try to pull that out of the case, it's going to want to lock in place. So what I do, take a pair of snap ring pliers and get down in the case itself. And we're going to work against the center support in the case and push it back against a little spring. There's an anti-clunk spring in there that holds that. So we're kind of working against it. If you can see that moving, hear it, that's what we're trying to do. Get it released, if you will, from the little notch in the case. Okay, back in here. Okay. Okay, so we've got some tension relieved off that spring there by squeezing the snap ring pliers. Now I'm going to smack the output shaft back towards me. And release that center support from the case itself. Now we'll see if we can push it forward a little bit. There we go. There's the center support we were trying to get out here. And this is where I'm mentioning the lugs on here against the case. What we were doing was rotating that slightly against. Let me get it out of here so I can show you. Got some planetaries, some clutches and stuff to take out of here. The output shaft, which we were going after, and the ring gear. And here's our spring we were talking about, anti-clunk spring. That sits down in the case and is putting pressure against that support. What we were doing was trying to rotate it back against the spring tension of that spring right there, allow it to be released from the case itself. All right, all we've got left in there is the output shaft, which we were originally going after, being the two-wheel drive there. The one I showed you before, four-wheel drive, obviously much shorter output shaft.
Here, Andy is removing the pump gasket. It's not uncommon for this pump gasket to be stuck to the transmission case. When that happens, the gasket will not come out in one piece like this one did. This can get a little messy and contaminate the inside of the transmission with old gasket material. Removing debris from the inside of the transmission case is pretty easy when the transmission case is empty. So, if the gasket is gonna be difficult to remove, it's best to find that out right now while the transmission case is still empty.
All right, we're going to do reassembly here on this. We're going to change our output shaft. First thing we're going to do is put in the ring gear. We've got a bearing on the back side. Flat side on that bearing goes towards the ring gear. We're probably going to need a little bit of assembly glue to stick that in place because it's going to fall off when we flip it over. So all I'm going to do is that, stick the bearing in place, flip it over, drop it down into the case itself. We know we're seated well because she spins nice and smooth. So. Next item, rear planetary here. Another bearing we've got to put in place. Once again, look for your flat side. That's going to go down against the planetary. A little bit of assembly glue, Vaseline, whatever you got. Just don't use regular grease. Stick that on there. Flip it over. We're going to mesh planetary pinions here with the ring gear. So we're going to rotate it back and forth until she drops down. You can feel the bearing seat. And once again, nice and smooth. You can feel it spin. Okay. Now we've got to put in a set of clutches in the back of the case. These are low reverse clutches. Your later model transmissions are also going to have a wave plate. Okay, just that. It's got a wavy bit to it there. Okay, that's going to go in the case first. Then you're going to stack your steels and frictions in there. Okay, alternating steel friction, you'll end up with a friction on top. And then what you'll have after that is the center support, which becomes the pressure plate for those clutches. will be down on top of that. So what we've got to do is get the steel plates to lug to the case, and there is a direct way that they'll go in. You're looking for this little notch to face towards the bottom of the case, and then flip it around to get it to line up with the notches in there. Same thing with the steels, okay? Got a notch towards the bottom there. We'll start with the wave plate in there first. Flip it around until we get that to line up with the lugs in the case. All right, next we're going to put a steel plate in there. That notch towards the bottom, that's going to lug to the case. Friction with the internal teeth is going to lug to that planetary that we put down in there. Not a directional piece. Drop it in, get it to lug to that planetary, and it'll drop down against the steel. So we just keep doing that for 5 each until we've got them all stacked in there. Ending up with the friction on top. So we've got our center supports got to go in there. Make sure the center race stays in place. Okay, that's going to go in there. Once again, we've got notches in this to line up in the case, so it's only going to go in one way. What you can look for here is the wide notch, if you will, right here. Will line up with the wide part of the case there. Kind of help get you guided in place. One thing to remember though is we've got to put our spring in the case, okay? What they call an anti-clunk spring. Okay, notice that's got a little notch in it right there. When it sets down in the case, that notch is going to line up with the case itself, okay? And as the center support goes in, once again, it's going to kind of snap in place with this guy. As it goes in place, we'll have to push this down or shove that down into the trans.
The anti-clunk spring lives between the 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock position down inside the transmission case. For reference, the valve body is located at the 6 o'clock position.
Okay, putting our anti-clunk spring in down in the case. What I'm going to do is apply a little bit of blue goo to try and stick it to the case a little bit. And place it where it needs to be, which is going to be right down in that area before we put our center support in. Wide notch over here, about the 3-4 o'clock position. You can see our other one straight up towards the top. What we're going to do is grab this baby and hope we don't want that inner race to slide out on us completely when we put it in. So we're going to try and put this in. Slide her down in the case. It's going to rest up against the clunk spring. And at this point, what we're going to have to do is push down on that center support to get it to seat into position. And thereby it's going to compress the anti-clunk spring. And then what we've got to do is rotate the inner race to line with the rear planetary and get that to drop all the way down in. Next is snap ring. Hold that center support in. Okay. The gap on that's going to go around the anti-clunk spring here. So part of it's going to touch the clunk spring, the other part's going to be on the far right side of it. So it's going to kind of straddle the part of the anti-clunk spring that's sticking up through the center support. So what I do is get this end started if we can, hold it in place, and then we're going to work it with the snap ring and the screwdriver together. Make sure it's seated against the case completely. All right, I've got a washer to go in on top of that inner race of that center support. It does have some tabs on it, locks down in there. I'm going to go ahead and throw a little bit of blue grease on the back side of that just to make sure it kind of sticks in place and doesn't move around on us. Like I said, those 4 tabs are just going to lock in there. It's no particular position that goes in. It can rotate any direction as long as it locks into that inner race. Okay, next, sun gear goes down in. Splines with the pinions in that rear planetary. Just drops down in there. All right. And the shell goes in next. Splines to that sun gear. Got to get it to drop all the way down in there. Okay, we got our spline to that sun gear. Next we got the hub. It's got to go in there. Bearing also. On the later models, this is a bearing. Earlier models is going to be a thrust washer like the plastic one we just put in. We've got a couple of lips on it. That's got to face down over this little ledge on that hub ring gear. So once again, we'll throw a little bit of blue goo on there, assembly goo. Flip that over, goes in like that. We've got another bearing on the top side that's for our planetary. I'm going to pick that out of there, set that aside. Flip her over, drop her in place, and splines back there to the rear planetary. Next is front planetary. Once again, bearing. It's got a flat side to it. That goes down against the component. We'll throw a little bit of blue goo on there. Put that on, stick it in place. Flip it over, drop that in, and we're ready for the output shaft and snap ring. Next step we got to do is put that new 4-wheel drive output shaft in. That's going to go in from the backside and come up. And then once that's in place, we'll be reinstalling the little snap ring. That'll slide down over the shaft, lock into that groove right there. That'll kind of hold the whole rear section together, if you will, in the transmission case. So what we've got to do is release the case, which I had kind of locked in place here so it wouldn't flip over on me. Take the output shaft. A couple things, we've got a spline here, so we've got to work it up through the transmission case here to the output. Rotate it, and then hold our front planetary in place because it's got a spline to that. So then what I'm going to do is manhandle this up. Stand it up here on our case. And make sure that everything is dropped all the way down. If we're in all the way, snap ring should drop into that groove and lock everything in place.
Here it is with the snap ring installed.
We got enough here. I might have to clamp it again. Okay, next we put in the input drum, input reverse drum together. Just to double check here, you want to give this a little spin, a reverse drum. And I do what I call a drop test. Sound like it's down all the way. If it's against one of the clutches on one of the frictions, it's not going to sound so solid. So you know it's not in all the way. So I just do that little test here, make sure those are good. They'll put the in together. What I'm going to do is get an old pair of vice grips here to use as a handle. What happens is the splines on here, if you will, or grip teeth on the vice grips will fit in between the splines on the input shaft. So if you do that, clamp them down gently, won't do any damage to the input shaft. Gives you something to hold. It's a lot of weight. You got to drop this in. You've got multiple sets of clutches here to spline. You've got a sun gear to spline in place with the pinions, so it's not going to just drop right in there. That's the reason I use the vice grips. Makes it a little bit easier to handle. Get it in until you can feel it stop, and then once again, we're going to just work this back and forth. Sometimes if you use the park position, that'll help. and then I'm going to lift slightly on this actually as I'm trying to get it to drop. We've got a couple of clutches there. Continues to work. It's way down in there. We just got to keep going until she drops all the way. We can see we're right at where that reverse input drum splines with the shell. So we're right there. There we go. That'll work. It's going. Okay, I think we got it all the way. What am I going to do? Drop test it. Lift it up, take the weight off everything, let it drop. Nice solid thunk. We know we're splined all the clutches. It's dropped in all the way. Next 2/4 band, we'll get a drop in the case. What we're going to do here is we're going to get the anchor lug hooked up first. And then we're going to work the apply side, the servo side of that down into the case. Now we're going to get this in here, work it, work with the anchor side first, which is this side here, as I mentioned. We're going to need a screwdriver. We're going to have to keep prying the drum over to get the anchor side of the band to drop in there. All right? It's down in there a little ways. We've got to go in far enough, work it over, and get it onto the anchor for that band. I'm going to need a pick or something here. Okay, we're getting closer to the anchor there. We're going to need the screwdriver in there at the same time. Take some weight off the band and move that over. There we go. It's almost there. Okay, anchor side's locked on. That actually is the easy side to put on, believe it or not. Now we've got to work the apply side in, and you can see where it just doesn't look like there's going to be enough room for this to fit down in there. But there is. You just got to work it, move the drum over as you go, and you're going to have to literally force the band in place. It's no better way to do it there. End of the screwdriver, that and a hammer if you have to. Tap the band down in place. It'll fall in place part of the way. That's not all the way yet, because you can see this here is not past the case. Oh, we got a little more to go. He's getting it there. Okay, looks like we're good. All we've got to do is make sure that we are hooked within the pin for the band, which is going to be hidden way down in here. Probably going to need a flashlight. Take a look in there and see. There's our apply side of the pin right there. Make sure that it's hooked to the apply side of the band. Right there. Anchor's still hooked in here good. We're good to go. Okay. We've got the drums in, we got the band in, we're ready to put our pump in. Going to use a fresh pump gasket here. A little bit of assembly goo. I just kind of dab it in place around here on the surface to kind of hold the gasket so it doesn't spin around on me when I'm trying to put the pump in, get out of position. Line everything up. Drop that in, stick it in place, line up the bolt holes. Make sure we're good. Okay, pump. Do have the one thrust washer that we removed during disassembly. That's got the two locating tabs to go here, locate onto that, what's called the stator of the pump. We're going to put a little bit of assembly goo there on the washer, whatever it takes. Make sure it sticks in place so when we flip the pump, it will not fall off. Okay. Okay, there and there, stuck in place. It's still got a lot of trans fluid on it, but I'm going to go ahead and throw a little bit more assembly lube on here just to make sure everything slips in place and we don't tear any of these sealing rings here. So rotate that around to where we're lined up with the passages in the pump. This style pump is going to use this metal clad seal that's going to go on for an outer seal afterwards. Earlier style pumps are going to use an O-ring, and it's going to go in a groove that's cut in the pump body itself. So if we had that, we'd put that O-ring in place now, put the assembly lube on it. So, got the suction for the pump, we know goes down towards the bottom to line up with the case, hole in the case. Flip that over, work that into place, and then we've got to line up our holes for the pump bolts. Need a flashlight. Yeah. Rotate that a little bit. Line those up. Let's see where we're at. Okay, that should be pretty close right there. Pump bolts. They do have an O-ring on them to seal to the case. So what we're going to do now is find some new O-rings to go on there. Once they've been compressed, you probably want to replace them. These are already installed, so we're going to remove all those, put new O-rings on. And then I like to use a drop of blue Loctite on the pump bolts, put those in and torque them to specs. I think that's about all that's left in that tube.
Torque the bolts to 18 foot-pounds or 216 inch-pounds. Torque the bolts in a star pattern. After you've torqued all the bolts in a star pattern, make one last pass around the pump, making certain that you didn't miss any bolts.
Okay, pump bolts torqued. Let's not forget our O-ring for the lockup clutch. Put that back on the input shaft. Just down into that groove. Okay. Now, we've got lockup solenoid to go back into the pump. Here. Work that in there, don't force it. That is an O-ring seal. Till that seats down there. And we've got 2 bolts for that. Okay, we got the other solenoid that we took off earlier. We had put the clip on there to hold it in place or not lose it. Right? That's going to go down into there on the valve body. Once again, work it. That does have 2 O-rings that seal it to the valve body. And the retaining clip simply locks in. Don't forget to reconnect. Electrical connection there. And we've pretty well buttoned it up. Put our filter back on, put our pan on, and we've done it. In this case, we do have our O-ring, if you will, the pump seal, because this has the metal clad seal. This guy goes on after the pump goes in and simply goes around the pump. Push that in place. And what's going to happen is when you bolt your bell housing back in place, that's going to push that seal into its final place there. And that's it. So we wrapped up the output shaft change for you on this 4L60E. Showed you some of the tricks and tips on that. Appreciate you watching the videos. We're going to have a lot more to come. And we'll have some advanced ones if you want to show you some of the tips and tricks that I've learned over the 40+ years that I've been doing this.
Thanks for joining me and Andy on this video. If you found this video helpful or even just entertaining, you can let us know by hitting that like button. We would love to hear from you. Drop us a line in the comments section down below. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to this YouTube channel and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Speaking of which, we've got a lot of videos currently in the works. If you're interested in helping this YouTube channel grow, there are a number of ways that you can get involved. Check out the video description below for more information. Catch you next time.